The wind howled across the Montana plains, cold enough to bite through bone. Snowflakes swirled like ghosts in the moonlight, and the world seemed painted in silver and sorrow. Inside a sprawling ranch house, the fire burned low, flickering shadows across the worn face of Luke Callahan, a man once known across the West as the Millionaire Cowboy. He had everything once: cattle, land stretching farther than the eye could see, and a wife who'd been the light of his wild heart. But that light had gone out 3 nights ago, leaving him with only silence, and a newborn baby crying in his arms. Luke's rough hands trembled as he held the tiny bundle tighter against his chest. The baby's cheeks were red with cold, its cries weak and fading. His wife Clara had died giving birth in that very cabin, her last words still echoing in his mind. "Promise me, you'll keep her warm." But warmth was running out. The storm had cut off every road to town, and the milk had run dry. He had gold in his safe, horses in the barn, land enough to drown in, but none of it could feed a hungry baby. That night the proud cowboy felt more helpless than he ever had before. He looked out the frosted window and across the frozen path that led toward the neighboring cabin. A faint light flickered there, a lantern glowing in the dark. Sarah Miller, the quiet widow who lived alone since her husband died in the mines 2 winters back. Luke had barely spoken to her in all the years she'd been there. She was a soft-spoken woman, always wrapped in shawls and silence, tending her chickens and keeping to herself. But now, as the baby whimpered weakly in his arms, Luke had no pride left. Desperation can melt even the hardest man's pride. He wrapped the baby tight in a blanket, pulled on his coat, and stepped into the storm. The wind slapped his face, the snow blinding his eyes. But he pushed forward, each step heavy, his boots sinking deep in the drifts. The world was nothing but white and wind and the faint cry of the child. His heart pounded with fear. He had faced stampedes, gunfights, and outlaws, but nothing had ever terrified him like that tiny, fading cry. When he reached Sarah's cabin, his knock was weak. The door opened slowly, light spilling out onto the snow. Sarah stood there, a shawl around her shoulders, surprise in her eyes as she saw the shivering cowboy holding a crying infant. "Please," Luke rasped, his voice breaking. "She's hungry. I don't know what to do." Without a word, Sarah's face softened. She stepped aside, motioning him in. The warmth hit him like a blessing. The smell of soup, firewood crackling, the golden glow of oil lamps. Sarah took the baby gently from his arms, her movements tender and sure. "Sit by the fire," she said softly. Luke obeyed, exhaustion overtaking him. His eyes followed her every move as she unwrapped the baby, checked her temperature, and prepared a small bottle of goat's milk. "You're lucky I still keep a nanny goat," she murmured almost to herself. "Saved me once too." The baby drank greedily, her cries softening into peaceful coos. Luke exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He watched Sarah, the way the light touched her face, gentle but strong, like someone who had known loss and learned to live with it. For a moment, something inside him stirred, something that had been frozen since Clara's death. When the baby finally slept, Sarah placed her in a cradle by the fire. "She's beautiful," she whispered, tucking the blanket closer. Luke swallowed hard. "She looks like her mother," he said, voice low. Then, silence. Only the sound of the storm outside filled the room. Sarah poured him a cup of coffee and sat across from him. "You should stay until the storm passes," she said. "It's too cold to take her back out there." Luke nodded, too tired to argue. His eyes drifted to the cradle again. The baby sighed softly, tiny fingers curled in dreams. "I had a daughter once," Sarah said after a long pause. She didn't survive the fever. That was 5 winters ago. Her eyes glistened, but her voice didn't break. Sometimes I still hear her laugh in the wind. Luke looked down at his hands. The same hands that once held reins, rifles, and riches, now trembling from loss and fear. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Seems the world takes more than it gives." Sarah smiled faintly. "Sometimes it gives back, in ways we don't expect." The fire crackled between them, painting their faces in gold and warmth. Outside the storm still raged, but inside that small cabin something changed. A bond, fragile as the first morning light, began to form. Sarah leaned over to check on the baby again, her hands brushing Luke's as she adjusted the blanket. For a moment their eyes met, and in that quiet touch, something unspoken passed between them. Luke spent the night by the fire, listening to the storm fade into dawn. When morning came, the snow had stopped. The world outside glittered under a pale sun. Sarah was already up, feeding the baby again. She looked at him with a soft smile. "You'll need to bring her here for a few days," she said gently, "until she's strong." Luke nodded. "You'd do that after everything?" She shrugged, eyes warm. "A mother doesn't need to give birth to care for a child." For the first time in days, Luke smiled, small, tired, but real. He reached out, touched the baby's hand, and whispered, "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know how to repay you." She looked at him quietly. "Just don't forget what love can heal." As he looked into her eyes, the hardened cowboy felt something stir deep inside. Not just gratitude, but a strange warmth he hadn't felt since Clara was alive. The wind outside whispered softly across the white hills, as if carrying the promise of something new. That night, a millionaire cowboy had come seeking help for his baby. But what he found in that quiet neighbor's home was something far greater than milk. It was mercy, it was hope. And perhaps somewhere deep within, it was the beginning of love. Days turned into weeks, and the storm that once buried the valley gave way to sunlight. Snow melted from the rooftops, and the sound of trickling water filled the quiet air. But inside Sarah Miller's cabin, time moved differently, slower, softer. Luke Callahan, the once untouchable millionaire rancher, now found himself staying longer each day. His mornings began with the baby's gentle cries and Sarah's calm voice humming an old lullaby as she warmed milk by the stove. His nights ended by the fire, the baby sleeping in her cradle, and Sarah's laughter, faint but real, filling the silence that had once haunted him. He fixed her fences, chopped her wood, repaired the leaky roof that winter storms had torn apart. She fed him in return, not with gold or riches, but with warmth, kindness, and simple meals that tasted more comforting than anything money could buy. The baby little Grace grew stronger with each passing day, her cheeks full and rosy, her giggles lighting up the tiny cabin. Luke often caught himself just watching, his rough cowboy hands resting on his knees as he stared at the two of them, the pain inside his chest slowly melting away. One afternoon, Luke returned from town with supplies, milk, flour, medicine. He found Sarah by the fence, holding Grace up to the sunlight, her face glowing as the baby reached out toward the sky. The sight stopped him in his tracks. It was like watching life itself bloom again after a long, dark winter. He swallowed hard and said softly, "She looks happy." Sarah turned, smiling gently. "She is. She feels love all around her. Maybe because she knows she's safe." Luke's voice broke slightly. "Safe, that's all I ever wanted for her." He paused, then added quietly, "I couldn't do it alone. Sarah shook her head. No one can. Not really. She looked at him, straight into the eyes of a man who'd been broken by loss and rebuilt by love. You built an empire, Luke Callahan. But out here, it's not about what a man owns. It's about who he lets in. Those words struck deeper than any bullet ever could. That night, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Luke sat by the fire, the baby asleep beside Sarah. The warmth of the room wrapped around him like a long-forgotten dream. He realized something then: all his money, his land, his success, they were nothing compared to the peace he felt sitting in that small cabin with the woman who had saved his daughter's life. But peace, like the seasons, is fragile. A telegram arrived from Helena, Luke's lawyer. The railroad company wanted to buy part of his ranch for expansion, offering a fortune that could make him even richer. It would mean leaving the valley and leaving Sarah. He stared at the letter for hours, the weight of choice heavy in his chest. When he told her, Sarah only nodded. "You have to do what's right for you and Grace," she said softly. "I'll always be here." He left that night, taking Grace with him. The sound of Sarah's door closing behind him felt like losing the sun. For 2 months, Luke handled business, signed papers, and met men in suits who spoke of millions like it was dust. But every night, when Grace reached out in her sleep, murmuring softly, he thought of the woman who had fed her when he couldn't, the woman whose heart had warmed his when the world was frozen. He realized then, he wasn't just missing Sarah's presence, he was missing home. One morning before dawn, Luke saddled his horse, wrapped Grace in a blanket, and rode through the gray light toward the valley once more. Snow was falling again, light and gentle this time, not cruel, not harsh. When he reached Sarah's cabin, her lantern was glowing faintly in the window. She opened the door, and for a moment, she just stared, her lips parting in surprise, eyes wide with disbelief. Luke dismounted, holding Grace close. His voice was rough with emotion. "I sold the land, gave up the deal. The money don't mean a damn thing if it takes me away from where my heart belongs." Sarah's eyes softened, tears glimmering. "And where is that, Luke?" He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Right here with you. You saved her life, and mine." For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the soft fall of snow and the baby's gentle coo filled the air. Then Sarah reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his face. "Welcome home, Cowboy." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her and the baby. A family formed not by blood, but by grace. The fire inside the cabin glowed brighter that night, and as they sat together, Luke finally felt the peace that wealth could never buy. He looked down at Grace asleep in Sarah's arms and whispered, "She's got your heart." Sarah smiled through her tears. "No, Luke, she's got ours." Outside, the storm drifted away, leaving only quiet snow and stars shining over the valley. The once lonely rancher had found more than help that winter. He had found love, redemption, and the warmth of a second chance. And as the fire crackled and their laughter filled the night, the world outside faded away, leaving only the sound of love reborn beneath the snow.